Every week on Panther-Lair.com, we do our little transfer tracker where we look at all the guys who left Pitt this offseason for the transfer portal, where they ended up, how they've been doing, how they've been playing, and how they've been performing. I figure since it's an off week, we're about a third of the way through the season, there's a decent little sample size out there. We can talk about it on the show today. Obviously we'll have our weekly update on Panther-Lair.com just to let you know where everybody is at and how they're doing. But I thought we could talk about it a little bit today. I mean, we talked so much about the transfer portal, talk about players coming, talk about players going. And, I think there's an interesting conversation to have there about who left and how they're doing and how their seasons have been going. And inevitably, sort of an extended question of, well, how would they be doing here? If they hadn't gone to the transfer portal, what would it be? Now, we're not going to spend this whole time talking about, well, he should have stayed and he should have stayed. I mean, everybody makes their own decisions, right? I mean, you have to go with what you feel is the best decision for you at any given time. Obviously, there's an interesting situation taking place at UNLV right now. We recorded this ahead of time, and there was a lot coming out yesterday about that UNLV situation. So it's not like I would even talk about it because I'm sure new information would come out by the time this video is published. But, everybody has to make their own decisions. Everybody has to gather the information best they can and make their own decisions. And certainly a lot of guys did that. I think 15 to 20, somewhere between 15 and 20 players left Pitt this offseason, transferred out. 15 of them landed at FCS or FBS schools. A few guys haven't found a home yet. One guy ended up at a junior college, maybe more. I just haven't been able to confirm that other guys landed at junior colleges. So, 15 to 20 guys left. Let's call it 3 dozen guys left, or 3 dozen, a dozen and a half guys left for the transfer portal. And Pitt brought in, 3, 6, 9, 12, just about the same, about 15 guys on scholarship who came in to be on the roster. And they all made decisions for their own reasons. So, I don't want to sit around too much and say, boy, this guy should have stayed. He would have done better at Pitt, or this guy should have done. They had their reasons for going, A lot of it was money. Some of it was playing time and opportunity. Either way, guys are gone. Guys have come in. Let's talk about how Pitt did in the transfer portal, what they lost, how those players are doing, and what they added, how those players are doing. Little transfer talk on a Thursday here on the Morning Pitt. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. No, there's an inherent flaw in trying to do a complete one-to-one comparison. When you talk about transfers who leave and transfers who come in, we're going to sit here. Obviously, we're going to talk about Christian Veer and we're going to talk about Eli Holstein. Well, we can't make a one-to-one comparison there. There's a million other factors that go into it, and we can't sit here and say, well, Pitt did better than they won that trade in the transfer portal. If we talk about Dayon Hayes and Nate Matlack, it's not a trade, right? Nobody traded Dayon Hayes for Nate Matlack. Nobody traded Christian Veer for Eli Holstein. That doesn't even make sense. They were on the team at the same time this spring. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to say, well, Pitt did better there. But it is interesting to compare how guys are doing at their new schools versus how guys are doing, the guys that Pitt has brought in. Inevitably, all right, there are some guys that we're going to talk rather directly about, players who walked away from starting jobs to go to other schools and take on roles that may be less than a start, because not all of the guys who left Pitt, guys who were starters at Pitt, not all of them ended up as starters at their new schools. As a matter of fact, a number of them are coming off the bench or working in reserve roles. So, we are going to highlight that a little bit, but it is interesting. Got the old legal pad, the yellow pad out of what players have done at their new locations, new destinations. It's interesting to look at and see what's become of those guys, what's become of the transfers, as well as the transfers that Pitt has brought in. So, before we jump into it, of course, like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com to get all your Pitt video coverage, these Morning Pitt videos every day of the week, the weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. like we did last night with me and Jim Hammett and you. Our post-game shows, which we won't have this week because there's no game, but we'll have next week after the North Carolina game. We'll be live next Saturday night for a post-game show to talk about what we saw out of Pitt, North Carolina. And then anything else that we might pop up here on the YouTube channel, press conferences, interviews, highlights, things like that. It's all right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So like this video and subscribe to not miss any of it. And then I'd be remiss not to tell you about Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting, and message boards to talk with other Pitt fans. The best online community of Pitt fans you are going to find. And if you are curious about it, you want to try it out, you want to find out if it's really all that in a bag of chips, let me tell you, friend, we are giving it to you free until the end of the regular season. Now through November 30th, you get a free trial. I mean, you can only sign up for it this week, but the free trial will take you through the end of November, the end of the regular season, so you can find out what all the Pitt coverage is about. This is looking like a very interesting season. For sure, you want to be part of it on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. Talking to other Pitt fans about everything that's going on in the world of Pitt sports. All right. Oh, to get that free trial, use the promo code PittPerfect. I almost forgot the promo code. PittPerfect. PittPerfect is the promo code. Sign up at Panther-Lair.com. Free trial through the end of the regular season. All right. Players who left. There were 15 total who went to other FCS or FBS schools. Some playing more than others, some not playing much at all. A few playing prominent roles, a few playing not quite so prominent roles. Let's jump into it here. All right, the most notable transfers, the guys who I think made the most noise when they transferred, the players who certainly I think Pitt fans have kept an eye on the most since they transferred, are the two defensive ends who went to Colorado, Deion Hayes and Sam Okunlola. Two guys who were, Hayes was a starter all of last season and projected to be a starter entering this season. Okunlola, I think, moved into the starting lineup late in the year, certainly would have been a starter this year at Pitt. At Colorado, Colorado's played 4 games so far. Hayes and Okunlola both started the first 2 games of the season. Okunlola moved to the bench for the 3rd game. Hayes stayed in the starting lineup for the 3rd game. And then this most recent game, they beat Baylor. They flipped. Okunlola was starting. Hayes was coming off the bench. So far through these 4 games, Deion Hayes has 3.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and according to Pro Football Focus, 4 pressures through 4 games. Sam Okunlola, 2 tackles for loss, no sacks, through 4 games. Now, this is one of those situations where we're not going to sit here and say, boy, they should have stayed. They would have had more prominent role. They both started 3 games out of 4 so far. And I don't think their lack of production is something you look at and say, well, see, Pitt's better off without them. Pitt may or may not be better off without them. Locker room, on the field, off the field, whatever it may be. I don't know. What I could say is that I think they would probably help. Okunlola in particular, and even Hayes would help this Pitt defense and defensive line and defensive end position with generating more pressure. Even though at Colorado, through 4 games, they haven't really done much. Combined, 5.5 tackles for loss through 4 games. The other guy who probably will be playing a lot is DeAndre Jules. Defensive tackle, went to South Carolina, walked away from a starting job. I think he started half the season last year. Would have been a starting defensive tackle all year this year at Pitt. Transferred to South Carolina, probably with financial motivations, which is fine. At this point in time, we're all adults here. I can't really hold that against you. I can't begrudge you chasing the money, and I think this is what a lot of these guys did. And I don't think it's a character flaw like it might have been viewed in previous years. But DeAndre Jules goes to South Carolina. He has started 1 game so far for the Gamecocks. He has 0 tackles for loss, 0 sacks. I think he has a fumble recovery, and that's been the extent of his production and contribution. I think he played a season low 14 snaps this past week, although South Carolina beat the pants off of Akron. And so, I'm sure they got a lot of players on the field, so maybe that accounts for a lower snap count. But DeAndre Jules not making a huge impact there so far. He's joined at South Carolina by Bengali Kamara, a guy who was a starter last year, may have been in a competition for a starting job this year at Pitt. I'm not sure if he would have started ahead of Kyle Lewis or Rasheem Biles for that matter. I think both of those players are showing that they're really good. And they're playing a lot and playing really well and making plays. And I would say they're, some of Pitt's best players right now. I've put both among my top 5 ranking. Kyle Lewis I've put as my number 1 player on the Pitt, maybe on the roster overall. But Bengali Kamara went to South Carolina. He's played in 3 games so far on defense, has not started a game. He's played 40 snaps in 3 games. And so not a lot of production there, not a lot happening. He's got a handful of tackles, some on special teams, but not really contributing. Look, Bengali Kamara is that guy that I have owned. I've taken the L on for all my hyping. He didn't live up to the hype. He didn't live up to the expectations. He didn't live up to my expectations or the Pitt coach's expectations because, listen, I wasn't just imagining hype and expectations for him. The Pitt coaches also believed that he was in line for the kind of season that I thought he was in line for, even though it didn't really pan out. But he's not doing a whole lot at South Carolina, not getting many opportunities. Buddy Mack, who was on scholarship at Pitt, I believe he left to go to South Carolina as a walk-on. Has not. I think he's played just a couple of snaps here and there on defense, mostly on special teams. I think he had a fumble recovery too, maybe a scoop and score touchdown actually earlier on like a punt or something, a special teams play for Buddy Mack. But I believe he's at South Carolina, not doing a whole lot because he's just not in the rotation, not in the mix at safety or linebacker. Now, the other starting linebacker they lost to the transfer portal this offseason was Solomon DeShields, who left after the spring and went to Texas A&M. A starting linebacker last year, probably in line for a starting job this year, unless he also would have been beaten out by Rasheem Biles. Who knows? I think Biles would have played a ton. I don't think DeShields would have gotten the percentage of snaps that he got a year ago, with Biles kind of breathing down his neck. I think Lewis might have beaten out Kamara for a starting job. I'm not sure if Biles would have beaten out DeShields or not. Either way, Solomon DeShields went to Texas A&M. He's only played in a couple of games so far. Pro Football Focus says he's only played 2 out of South Carolina's or out of A&M's 4 games. A&M actually credits him with getting on the field in this most recent game. I forget who A&M played on Saturday, but their official website says he got on the field, didn't record any stats, but that he participated in the game. Pro Football Focus doesn't record him with any snaps, I should say, for that game. Either way, in the 2 games that Pro Football Focus says he has played, Solomon DeShields has logged 18 defensive snaps. He has 5 tackles on the season, half of a tackle for loss and half of a sack. And I said, we're not going to do like comparisons of players coming in, or transfers out versus the transfers coming in. And I think that's fair. But you know what I will do, though? Solomon DeShields left to go to Texas A&M, vacated the money linebacker position. The main player who has stepped in there, Rasheem Biles, has 32 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks. DeShields has 5 tackles, 0.5 tackles for loss, and 0.5 sacks. Now, I'm not going to say that Solomon DeShields made the right decision or wrong decision. I'm not going to say that Pitt's better off or anything like that. But what I will say is Rasheem Biles is playing better and having a more productive season this year than Solomon DeShields is having at Texas A&M. And probably I would say Biles' season this year compares pretty favorably to what DeShields did last year at Pitt. Couple of guys went to Florida A&M. Carter Johnson, the tight end. Antonio Kamen, the defensive end. Kamen transferred after his true freshman season. Never really spent much time at Pitt. He was only here for a year, or less than a year. Hasn't gotten on the field yet at A&M. Carter Johnson's been targeted 13 times in, I think, 4 games. It might have been 3 games that Florida A&M has played. He's got 8 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown, so he's got something of a prominent role in the passing game. More prominent probably than he would have had in Pitt's passing game this year. And so, seems like a good move for Carter Johnson. Byron Floyd transferred to Buffalo. You might say, who? Well, he's snapper 49. I didn't intend to have my snapper 49 shirt on today, but I did. Byron Floyd was trying to use NIL to raise money for Children's Hospital, and he had this snapper 49 marketing campaign. He sent me a shirt, and I tried to help him promote it a little bit. But anyway, he went to Buffalo. He's a long snapper. He's the primary long snapper for Buffalo. They beat Northern Illinois on the road over the weekend. Northern Illinois ranked team. They beat them in overtime with a bunch of with like 3 or 4 field goals in the game, and Byron Floyd was the long snapper for it. So, guess he's doing well. He could have been the long snapper here too. Christian Veyer, like I mentioned, I referenced him earlier. He's got Georgia State. He's the starting quarterback at Georgia State. Georgia State's 2-1. Most recently, 2 weeks ago, they were off this past week, but 2 weeks ago, Christian Veilleux led Georgia State on a fourth quarter comeback to defeat Vanderbilt. Christian Veilleux in that game threw his first interception of the season. He made it through almost 3 games without throwing a pick. On the season so far, Christian Veilleux has completed 63% of his passes. Again, this is in 3 games. 63% of his passes, 717 yards, 6 touchdowns and 1 pick, and he's run for a touchdown as well. Christian Veilleux playing much better through 3 games at Georgia State than he did through however many games he played at Pitt. And whether that's a credit to his improvement or an indictment on the offense that Pitt was running last year, it's probably both. But you know what? Christian Veilleux never struck me as a bad guy. He seemed like a perfectly nice kid. So it's nice to see him having some success at Georgia State and particularly leading a fourth quarter comeback. Izzy Polk transferred out to Akron. Israel Polk, he was a true freshman last year. He transferred to Akron. So far, he's caught 8 passes for 48 yards. He was their leader in targets through the first 2 or 3 games. That's dropped off a little bit. He only had 1 target against South Carolina on Saturday. He caught it for 6 yards, but he's got 8 catches for 48 yards. Stephon Hall. Now, here's 2 guys that I really like their transfer stories. Okay? I really like these guys' stories. Stephon Hall and Aiden Henningham. These are 2 guys who didn't really see an opportunity for themselves at Pitt. Didn't think they were going to get on the field. Stephon Hall looked at Javon McIntyre, Donovan McMillan, PJ O'Brien, Cruz Brookins, and said, I'm not going to get the playing time that I want. And so he went into the transfer portal, and he transferred to Youngstown State. Aiden Henningham, sort of the same thing. Looked at the linebacker position, looked at the outside linebackers, the middle linebackers, and said, I'm not going to get playing time here. I'm not going to get in the 2 deep. I'm not going to make the starting lineup for sure, and I'm probably not going to crack the 2 deep. And so he left. And he went to Albany State, which is in Georgia, not Albany, New York. And now he's a starting linebacker for Albany State. He's their leading tackler with 14 tackles, and he's got an interception. Stephon Hall goes to Youngstown State. He's a starting safety. I think he's 3rd or 4th on the team in tackles. He's got 14 tackles. He had 5 tackles, I think, against Pitt on Saturday. I like those kinds of transfer stories. I'm all for player, freedom of movement and everything, but I can decide which stories I like and which ones I don't. And I like the stories like that. Stephon Hall, Aiden Henningham say, we're not getting an opportunity here. I'm not going to get an opportunity here. So I'm going to transfer. You know what I mean? I'm going to go somewhere where I can find a better chance to play. And they found it. They're both starters. They're both playing a lot more through 4 games this season than they played at, over the entirety of their Pitt careers up until this point. So shout out to them. You know what I mean? I that feels like a good use of the transfer portal. I mean, guys can transfer for whatever reason they want, but I like those stories where guys are having success after not really getting an opportunity at Pitt. Those are the main ones. I forget. I feel like I'm missing someone who went to an FCS or FBS school. Javonte Royal went to New Mexico. He's not really playing much there. He's got a couple snaps on special teams, maybe in the first game. Trey Anderson, not the Todd Graham quarterback from 2011. Trey Anderson, remember, he was like a tight end coming out of high school in Utah. He went on a mission trip, came back 2 years later and came to Pitt as an offensive lineman. He transferred to Utah State. I think he's played in 2 games on special teams so far, so not getting on the field a whole lot. And I think that's it. I think that's about 15 guys who left Pitt for FCS or FBS schools, and that's how they're doing. I think you can call it what it is. There's not a lot happening there. You know what I mean? Hayes and Okunlola combining for 5.5 tackles for loss through 4 games. DeAndre Jules, no tackles for loss through 4 games. Solomon DeShields, barely even playing. Christian Veilleux, obviously, I think he's doing well at Georgia State, and I hope he continues to do well at Georgia State. But he left a crowded quarterback room, a quarterback room where he was no higher than 3. I get it. You know what I mean? I think there was a lot of consternation about guys leaving. They haven't necessarily done a whole lot at their next place. That doesn't mean they wouldn't have done a lot at Pitt or wouldn't have helped. Would it help to have Hayes and or Okunlola and or Jules on this team to shore up that defensive line? Yeah, I think so. Because when you look at what the transfers in on the defensive line have done, it's not great. And again, we don't want to do a one-to-one comparison because it's not a one-to-one comparison. Nate Matlack has outperformed Hayes and Okunlola. He's got 4.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks while starting every game for Pitt this season. So, like I said, Hayes has 3.5 tackles for loss and 2 sacks. Okunlola has 2 tackles for loss and 0 sacks. Matlack has 4.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks. And prior to this past week, he was leading the ACC in quarterback pressures. Dayon Hayes has like 4 pressures. So, production-wise, Matlack is putting up better numbers than those guys. Defensive tackles, not as much. I mean, Nick James is playing more than DeAndre Jules is, but he hasn't really produced. I guess, Jules has 0 tackles for loss and 0 sacks. James has 0.5 tackles for loss and 0 sacks. Chief Borders not doing a whole lot in 78 snaps for Pitt so far this year. David Ojebwe doing even less with less playing time. Anthony Johnson would probably be a bigger part of this defensive tackle rotation, but he's hurt. So, Pitt brought in a lot of defensive linemen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys. And you've gotten decent production out of Matlack, a lot of playing time out of Nick James, a decent amount of rotational playing time from Chief Borders, and you would have been getting more from Anthony Johnson, but he got hurt. So, again, it's hard to do a one-to-one comparison, but it is interesting to sort of stack those things up next to each other. Obviously, the biggest impact transfers for Pitt coming in have been Eli Holstein and Desmond Reed. Holstein with 12 touchdowns and 2 picks, plus 2 rushing touchdowns. Desmond Reed with 5 total touchdowns so far, 1 rushing, 3 receiving, 1 on a punt return. He's been one of the most dynamic players in the ACC through the first month of the season, and I don't see any reason for that to fall off unless he gets hurt. Raphael Williams and C.J. Lee have been decent additions. Lyndon Cooper's been a starter at every game this season at the center position. And Jake Overman, I think, has been a useful player. Key Thompson looked like a really good reserve at middle linebacker before he got hurt. And Nile, the long snapper, has done fine, I guess. Although I think I forget if he snaps for punts or placements, and then Nico Crawford does the other. So Nile's doing half of it. It's fine. He's doing a nice job. It's not a big deal. I would say, the transfers Pitt has brought in are producing more than the transfers they lost. That doesn't necessarily, again, there's a lot of factors that go into it. It doesn't necessarily mean one thing or another, but that's sort of the reality of the situation. But I think you're going to be influenced a little bit when it's like Eli Holstein and Desmond Reed, right? Like, those are the transfers you brought in. And they're playing such a huge role for this team this year. So I guess my kind of general conclusion, my grand conclusion would be Pitt did pretty well in the transfer portal and who they brought in. It doesn't mean they didn't lose players who could help them, because I think they did, but they did pretty well with the players that they brought in, and the players they brought in are a big part of the reason why they are 4-0 right now after 4 games. So a little bit of off-week content there, recapping the transfers. We'll probably do this again in a few weeks, maybe after the Syracuse game. You get 7-8 games into the season, kind of see where things stack up, see if anything's changed. But remember, on Panther-Lair.com, we run this down every week. We have the transfer tracker where we recap how Pitt's departed transfers did this in the most recent week and how they're doing on the season. I think it's interesting to keep up on those guys. We don't track every transfer from the past 3 years or something. We just track the guys who transferred this year. But I think it's interesting. People tend to be interested in it. And of course, it's right there at Panther-Lair.com. Go check it out and try the free trial to get you full coverage of Pitt all the way through the end of the regular season at Panther-Lair.com. Sign up now with the promo code PITTPERFECT. Thanks to Pitt's perfect 4-0 start. PITTPERFECT. One word, Pitt Perfect. Free trial through the end of the regular season. What a deal. Go check it out. Panther-Lair.com. And remember, if you're a Panther-Lair subscriber, you get to ask questions for the mailbag. We have the mailbag coming up tomorrow. There's still time to get questions in now, but go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. You can ask your mailbag question there. We'll answer as many as we can in tomorrow's mailbag edition of the Morning Pitt. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you've had a great week so far. It's already Thursday, folks, which is awesome. I hope you have a great Thursday, a perfect Thursday, as it were. And we'll catch up with you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pitt mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.